Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading from UPSC Civil Services examination perspective. Now, today, let us take up the important news appearing in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 11th April 2023, and these are the list of the news for today's discussion. Now, let's start our discussion with this news appearing in the editorial section on page number 6, titled Burning Bright. It highlights that India must balance conservation efforts of tigers with the rights of forest dwellers. So this editorial basically highlights about the concerns with respect to the protection of tigers in India. Now yesterday Vidushi ma'am has already discussed about the tiger census and about Project Tiger. So today let's go through some of the concerns which has been highlighted in this particular report titled Status of Tiger Report 2022. As this report highlights that despite increase in number of protected areas for tigers conservation since 1973, as we complete 50 years, still there are important concerns and challenges which still remains. And overall, this editorial also focuses on the same note and has highlighted an important issue with respect to the need for balance for tiger conservation efforts to be taken by the government and its authorities, and also for the rights of forest dwellers, particularly under the Forest Rights Act. So this editorial says that yes, there is a need for tiger conservation effort, but at the same time the rights of forest dwellers also needs to be protected, and along with this certain concerns which has been highlighted in this report of Status of Tigers 2022 should also be looked into. So on this note, this editorial mentions about certain challenges, particularly with respect to the aspect of deforestation which is taking place, and this is mainly because of climate change. As the report highlights that the quality of forest in 1/3 of the almost 40,000 square kilometer areas of tiger reserves or protected tiger areas are declining in terms of their quality. And this can be directly related to the impact of climate change across the country. And the other challenge highlighted in this editorial is with respect to loss of tiger habitat, particularly in the eastern zone, which has been highlighted in this part, that is Central Indian Highlands and Eastern Ghats landscape. So this report mentions that there is loss of tiger habitat, particularly in the area of Jharkhand, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. So the Status of Tigers 2022 report has divided the conservation efforts and challenges with respect to these 5 areas, namely Shivalik Hills and Gangetic Plains landscape, Central Indian Highlands and Eastern Ghats landscape, Western Ghats landscape, Northeast Hills and Brahmaputra floodplains landscape, and Sundarbans landscape. So the question arises as to why there is a need for balance vis-a-vis tiger conservation efforts and rights of forest dwellers. And one of the major reasons can be said to be increase in presence of tigers outside their protected areas. Now this term protected area has been defined under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 and includes national park, sanctuary, that is wildlife sanctuary, conservation reserves and community reserves. Now on this note, let's go through some of the important features or provisions with respect to the Scheduled Tribes and other traditional forest dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act of 2006, which is also referred as the Forest Rights Act. So before going into the provision of section 4, which mentions about recognition of and vesting of forest rights in forest dwelling scheduled tribes and other traditional forest dwellers, let us understand some of the basic terms first to further elaborate upon section 4. So it mentions about forest dwelling scheduled tribes, which means members or community of scheduled tribes who mainly reside in or who depend on the forest or forest lands for bona fide livelihood needs and include scheduled tribe pastoralist communities. Further, the Act also defines critical wildlife habitats, which means such areas of national parks and sanctuaries where it has been specifically and clearly established case by case on the basis of scientific and objective criteria that such areas are required to be kept as inviolate for the purpose of wildlife conservation. That is, these protected areas, namely national parks and sanctuaries, are important for wildlife conservation efforts. And it is to be decided after consultation with an expert committee which includes experts from the locality appointed by the government, where a representative of Ministry of Tribal Affairs shall also be included in determining such areas according to the procedural requirements arising from subsection 1 and 2 of section 4. And it is here where section 4 becomes important, which mentions about recognition of and vesting of forest rights in forest dwelling scheduled tribes and other traditional forest dwellers. So it highlights that irrespective of the fact that whatever has been provided in law, the central government hereby recognizes and vests forest rights in the forest dwelling scheduled tribes in states or areas in states where they are declared as scheduled tribes in respect of all forest rights mentioned in section 3, and the other traditional forest dwellers in respect of all forest rights mentioned in section 3, as section 3 provides for various rights of these forest dwellers. Now, section 4 clause 2 becomes important for our understanding vis-a-vis the balance between tiger conservation efforts and rights of forest dwellers. So this provision says that if any rights of the forest dwellers in critical wildlife habitats, that is national parks or sanctuaries, are further modified or impacted, then their approval would be necessary. So this provision says that the forest rights recognized under this act in critical wildlife habitats of national park and sanctuaries may subsequently be modified or resettled, provided that no forest rights holders shall be resettled or have their rights in any manner affected for the purpose of creating these areas for wildlife conservation, except by fulfilling these various conditions. So these conditions are: first, that is A, the process of recognition and vesting of rights as specified in section 6 is complete in all areas under consideration, namely with respect to prior approval of Gram Sabha. Next, it has been established that by certain activities of the forest right dwellers, it impacts or threatens the habitat of a concerned species or any particular species. So it says that it has been established by the concerned agencies of the state government in exercise of their rights under Wildlife Protection Act that activities or impact of presence of holders of rights, that is forest right dwellers, upon wildlife animal is sufficient to cause irreversible damage and threaten the existence of said species and their habitat. And because these species becomes vulnerable, hence these areas needs to be protected. The next point highlighted is that state government has concluded that other reasonable options such as coexistence are not available. The next point is with respect to resettlement options, particularly to meet livelihood measures in case the government intends to establish a protected area. So it says that resettlement or alternative package has been prepared and communicated that provides a secure livelihood for the affected individuals and communities and fulfills the requirements of such affected individuals and communities given in the relevant laws and policies of the central government. The next point highlighted is that free informed consent of Gram Sabha in the areas concerned to the proposed resettlement and to the package has been obtained in writing, and no resettlement shall take place until facilities and land allocation at the resettlement location are complete as per the promised package. Now these provisions puts another restriction on the action of government, particularly with respect to resettlement criteria. So it says that critical wildlife habitats from which rights holders are thus relocated for the purposes of wildlife conservation shall not be subsequently diverted by the state government or the central government or any other entity for other uses. So if the forest right dwellers have been resettled to this area, then this area should not be then used for some other purposes. And this has been provided under the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act of 2006. So it is because of these rights provided under the Forest Rights Act, this editorial has highlighted the need for a balance with respect to tiger conservation efforts and also rights of forest dwellers as per the Forest Rights Act. So on this note, let's go through the concerns which has been highlighted in this report with respect to tiger conservation efforts and also what needs to be looked into. So the first concerns highlighted here is the fact that despite increase in area of tiger reserves, most tiger reserves and protected areas exist as small islands in vast sea of unsustainable land use. Namely, if this is the tiger reserve area, then these tigers can be found only in a small area of that entire tiger reserve. So there are vast areas of these protected areas where no tigers can be found or hardly any tigers can be found. Now, the next very important point highlighted here is that habitat corridors for tiger movements between two protected areas, say between two national parks, are not protected areas. And because of this, the movement of tigers from this area to this area, that is, in these areas, remains vulnerable to threat or poaching. Now, another concern highlighted is the unsustainable human use of land along with development projects. So, these development projects, which are further extending into the forest areas, are also impacting the habitat of tigers and also other species. Now, another concern highlighted in the report is regarding the need to reduce human tiger conflict because of increasing presence of tigers outside the protected areas, and this makes the tigers more vulnerable to threat. Another concern highlighted here is the impact of climate change, namely, out of 40,000 square kilometer of forest in tiger states, only one third of the forest are in healthy condition. And this deterioration in the quality of forest also impacts tiger movement, and this also makes the tiger vulnerable to poaching. And based on this, the next point is increasing illegal wildlife trade, particularly in tiger products, as the demand are very high. Now, despite the measures taken by the government of India to reduce poaching in tiger and its products, the illegal wildlife trade in demand for tiger products has increased significantly. So, overall, these are some of the concerns which has been highlighted in the report, which needs to be looked into. Now, let's take up the next news for discussion appearing on page number 1 and also as a continuation on page number 10. This news says that Tamil Nadu House resolution asks centre to set time limit for governor for clearing bills. And this is with respect to Article 200 of the Indian Constitution, which provides for assent to bills with respect to state assembly. Now, we all know that there is growing conflict between the governor of Tamil Nadu and the elected government of Tamil Nadu, and the governor of Tamil Nadu has withheld certain bills. And recently, the governor of Tamil Nadu has highlighted that withholding assent to government's bill means that the bill is dead. And the government of Tamil Nadu has urged that the union government or the president should fix a time limit for the governor to give assent to bill under Article 200 of the Indian Constitution. Now, as of now, no such provision exists as to the time limit under Article 200 of the Indian Constitution. Further, the government of Tamil Nadu, including its chief minister, has also suggested the union government and the president that they must issue appropriate instructions to the governor to provide assent to bill, as the governor has withheld various bills of the Tamil Nadu Assembly. And in retaliation of this step taken by the governor of Tamil Nadu to withhold various bills, the government of Tamil Nadu has stated to implement some of the recommendations of Rajamannar committee with respect to center-state relations, particularly with respect to that of governor. So first of all, let us go through the provisions of Article 200 of the Indian Constitution, and then let's go through some of the important recommendations of Rajamannar committee regarding center-state relations. Now, according to Article 200 of the Indian Constitution, it provides for assent to bills. So it says that when Legislative Assembly or Legislative Council, in case a state has both Legislative Assembly and Legislative Council, when they passes the bill to the governor, then the governor has three options. Either the governor assents to the bill, that is, he approves the bill. Either the governor withholds assent, that is, he does not approve the bill. Or the governor reserves the bill for president's consideration. Now, in case the governor assents to the bill, then that bill becomes the law. And in the second case, when the governor withholds assent, then there is another option. So the provision further says that if the governor withholds assent to the bill, then there are other provisions which kicks in under Article 200. So it says that when the governor withholds assent, then it means that he does not approve of some of the provisions of the bill. And in this case, the governor can send back the bill to the Legislative Assembly as well as the Legislative Council with a message. And the provision in this regard highlights that the governor shall return the bill as soon as possible with a message for reconsideration of certain provisions, which according to the governor is not appropriate. So here the Constitution has used the term as soon as possible with respect to the governor sending back the bill to the Legislative Assembly or Legislative Council in case he withholds assent. And when the governor sends back the bill for reconsideration, the Legislative Assembly or the Legislative Council shall reconsider those provisions of the bill, and then the Legislative Assembly or the Legislative Council has two options. Either they return the bill with certain amendments as suggested by the governor, or they returned a bill without any amendment to the governor. And when such a bill is again presented to the governor either with or without amendment, then the governor shall not withhold assent therefrom. Hence, it means the governor has to sign the bill. So if you go through the entire mechanism of Article 200, no specific timeline as such has been provided under Article 200. And with respect to the governor returning back the bill to the Legislative Assembly, the word mentioned is as soon as possible. So clearly the constitutional provision has not set any specific time limit here. And this is what the government of Tamil Nadu has urged the union government and president to issue appropriate instruction to the governor with respect to providing a time limit within which the governor must give assent to the bill. However, no such time limit as such has been prescribed under Article 200 of the Indian Constitution. Now, there is another restriction provided under Article 200 for the governor to approve the bill. It says that provided further that the governor shall not assent to but shall reserve for the consideration of the president any bill which in the opinion of the governor would, if it become law, so derogate from the powers of High Court as to endanger the position which the court is by this constitution designed to fill. So if any provisions of any bill presented by the state legislative assembly, if it impacts or derogate the powers of High Court, then in such case the governor is not bound to provide his assent and can reserve the bill for the consideration of the president. So this is another conditionality attached in Article 200 of the Indian Constitution. So after understanding Article 200 of the Indian Constitution, let's now go through some of the important recommendations suggested by Rajmannar Committee on Center-State Relationship. Now this committee is a very old committee of 1971, which was constituted by the state government of Tamil Nadu. And this committee on center-state relations favored the state more as compared to the union. So if we look into some of the recommendations with respect to this committee, one of the major recommendations suggests that issue of directions to the states by union under Article 256, 257 and 389 should be omitted. And these provisions deals with directions provided by the center to the states. So Article 256 mentions about obligation of states and union, whereby it states that the executive power of every state shall be so exercised as to ensure compliance with the laws made by Parliament and any existing laws which apply in that state. And the executive power of the union shall extend to giving of such directions to state as may appear to the government of India to be necessary for this particular purpose. So it talks about giving directions by the union, that is by the center, to the states. And according to the Rajmannar Committee, this provision should be omitted. Similarly, with respect to Article 257, this should also be omitted, which talks about control of the union over states in certain cases. The next recommendation was to constitute interstate council under Article 263, because by then, that is in 1970s, the interstate council provided under Article 263 was not constituted so far as it was constituted based on the recommendation of Sarkaria Commission. Further, the committee suggested that every bill of national importance or which is likely to affect the interest of one or more states should, before its introduction in Parliament, should be referred to the Interstate Council and its views thereon should be submitted to Parliament at the time of the introduction of the bill. Now here we are referring to Article 249 of the Indian Constitution, which provides for power of Parliament to legislate with respect to matter in state list in national interest. Further, the committee recommended to constitute a high power commission for redistribution of entries of List 1 and List 3, that is Union List and Concurrent List in the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution. Another important point recommended here was that the residuary power of the legislation and taxation should be vested in the state legislatures. As of now, it is with the Union with respect to entry 97 of the Union List. Further, the committee also made certain important recommendations with respect to appointment of governor. It suggested that the governor should be appointed always in consultation with the state cabinet, and the other alternative will be to make the appointment in consultation with a high power body specially constituted for this particular purpose. The committee further suggested that once appointed, the governor should not be eligible for a second term of office or under any other office under the government. Further, the government should not be liable to removal except for proved misbehavior or incapacity after inquiry by the Supreme Court. Now you must know that as of now, the Constitution of India contains no provision with respect to removal of the governor. Now, the committee further suggested that the president should issue instrument of instructions, and these instrument of instructions are with respect to the functions of governor. So it says that these instructions should lay down guidelines indicating the matters in respect of which the governor should consult the central government or in relation to which central government could issue directions to him. And those instructions should also specify the principles with reference to which governor should act as the head of the state, including the occasions for the exercise of discretionary power. So basically, exercise of discretionary power should be based on instrument of instruction which is to be issued by the president. The committee further suggested that the provision in the constitution laying down that ministry holds office during the pleasure of the governor should be omitted. So clearly the committee recommended for dilution of certain powers of the governor. Now, with respect to exercise of discretionary power by the governor under Article 163, the committee recommended that it should be limited to only certain constitutional provisions, namely Article 239 Clause 2 regarding administration of Union Territories, Article 371 Clause 2, which provides for special provisions with respect to state of Maharashtra and Gujarat, and Article 371A Clause 1 and 2, which provides for special provision with respect to the state of Nagaland. Further, the committee also suggested that Articles 356, 357 and 365 may be totally omitted, and these relate to emergency provisions. And on this note, the committee suggested that in the alternative, sufficient safeguards should be provided in the Constitution itself to secure the interest of states against arbitrary and unilateral action of the ruling party at the center. Further, regarding State Public Service Commission, the committee suggested that Article 317 should be so amended as to vest in the state itself the power of removing from office the chairman or a member of State Public Service Commission subject to inquiry by the High Court. Presently, under Article 317, the chairman or any other member of a public service commission shall only be removed from their office by order of the president on ground of misbehavior after Supreme Court on reference being made to it by the president on inquiry has held in accordance with the procedure prescribed. So as of now, the power to remove members of State Public Service Commission lies with the president. So the committee recommended to amend the provision so that this power should be vested in the state. Now, the committee also suggested certain radical measures with respect to changes in the Constitution amendment and its process. So it says that every amendment of the Constitution, irrespective of the provision involved, should need ratification by the legislature of 3/4 or at least 2/3 of the states, representing 3/4 or at least 2/3 of the total population of the states. And regarding interstate river water disputes, the committee suggested that all these disputes regarding interstate rivers should be decided by the Supreme Court and satisfactory provision should be made for implementing its decision. Presently, these disputes are settled through a tribunal constituted under the Interstate River Water Disputes Act of 1956. So these are some of the important recommendations of Rajmannar Committee on Center-State Relations. Now a question can be asked in your prelims examination or in the mains examination as to the recommendations of this committee. So this news basically becomes important from the perspective of GS paper 2, especially under center-state relationship. Now let's take up the next news appearing on page number 9, which highlights that do the wealthy influence policy making more across all forms of democracy. Now this paper highlights the different forms of democracy followed in Norway and United States of America and how the wealthy influences the overall policy making. Now this topic becomes important particularly from the perspective of political theory regarding democracy and also its implication in different countries as a part of comparative constitution. So on this note, this paper highlights that one of the reasons that democracy is held to be superior to other forms of governance is the promise it holds that every citizen has equal vote. And same theory is adopted in India also. However, all democracies are not equal and there are certain concerns with respect to each of the democratic countries which we have in the world. Now, to understand the different types of democracies, we also need to understand the evolution, the different type of societies and also the different type of economies which is there in different countries. So on this note, we can say that United States of America is more of a capitalist country and hence its influential people, namely the industrialist and other capitalists, influences the decision making of the government. Whereas in Norway, it adopts a mixed approach that it also takes into account the views of the affluent class of the citizen, but also takes into account the views of the middle class and the other poor section of the society. So on this note, we can say that Norway follows the concept of social democracy, which incorporates both the elements of capitalism and also that of welfare measures for the poor, and it also incorporates views of the trade union. So in this analysis, let us go through this comparison with respect to the different kind of policy making and different aspects of democratic functioning in Norway and United States of America. So with respect to policy making process, policy making is skewed towards the preference of the affluent, but opinions of the poor and middle class is also taken. But in United States, public policy decidedly favored the preferences of the affluent at the expense of the poor and the middle class. And this is also because of the fact that US is a capitalist economy. Now, since Norway also looks into the welfare measures, hence there is low level of income inequality, whereas in United States there is high level of income inequality. Now, with respect to the welfare schemes, in Norway there is universal welfare measures, whereas in US there is targeted schemes almost like India. So in Norway there is universal welfare measures which benefits every citizen, such as having free education, free public health care. Universality of social benefits has the effect of ensuring their legitimacy and endorsement across classes, including the affluent. So these welfare measures are for everyone, for the rich, for the poor, for the middle class. But the welfare schemes in United States and also in India is almost same, as they are target oriented schemes, that is only for a specific class of citizens. Now talking about wealth redistribution, now Norway has one of the lowest levels of income inequality in the world, and hence there is less resource available to be distributed among the rich, whereas this is not the case in United States of America or even in India, as we have seen that income inequality in India is on the rise. Next, political party funding. So party gets 2/3 of their financing from the state subsidies, and political advertisement on television is banned. Whereas in US, political parties tends to heavily rely on industrialists. So it says that heavy reliance of political parties on private campaign donations. In India, we have almost similar aspects, as political parties can take contributions from various organizations including industries. Now talking about political advertising, this is banned in Norway, making the entire campaign process less vulnerable to private wealth. The opposite is the case in United States and also in India, as television advertising is a huge campaign expense in American elections. Now talking about trade unions, in Norway, historically strong trade unions exist that have been able to influence economic and social policy. And since Norway also follows social democracy, hence the opinion of trade union becomes an important facet of their social democracy. But this is not the case in United States of America, and even in India, the views of trade union is almost on a decline in India as well. So it says that trade unions in United States are no longer politically powerful as they once were. Now another important point highlighted here is with respect to energy reserves. Now Norway has vast reserves of oil and natural gas, and making profit from these vast reserves has made it possible for the government to maintain generous welfare transfer and also keeping the tax rates low. But this is not the case in United States or even India as compared to Norway. So no such significant reserve of natural resource in US, and similar thing can be said about India as well. Now talking about wealth of politicians, Norway's political class is not particularly wealthy, but it cannot be said the same with respect to the political class in US and also India, as the political class in both these countries are relatively wealthy. Now talking about gender inclusiveness, there are laws in Norway requiring proportionate representation of women in government institutions, and similarly in US there is no such mechanism with respect to proportionate representation of women in government institutions. So by going through this comparison model, there is two things which we can say with respect to the kind of democracy practiced in Norway. First, in a welfarist social democracy with low inequality, education is a stronger predictor of responsiveness than income. So in systems where inequality is less, education becomes one of the greater parameters with respect to responsiveness. But in cases where inequality is more, levels of income become the stronger predictor of responsiveness. And second point highlighted with respect to Norwegian example is that restrictions of money to influence elections and strengthening countervailing forces such as trade unions might change the balance of power. Now, both these aspects, that is, restrictions on political advertisements and also providing more weight to trade unions, is not the case either with United States of America or with that of India. And both these important points can be said to be the highlight of social democracy as practiced in Norway. Thus, this article becomes important from the perspective of GS paper 2 with respect to political theory and also polity and governance. Now, let's take up this news appearing on page number 16 in the economy section. And this news says that state subsidy accounting must be transparent, according to the Comptroller and Auditor General. He says that we wish to distinguish justiciable subsidies from freebies, which are not fiscally responsible. Now, fiscally responsible means financially sustainable. So, with respect to distribution of freebies, the CAG has stated that state must earn adequate returns on investment and also recover the cost of borrowing. So, in this news, the CAG, that is the Comptroller and Auditor General, has highlighted that if a state government wish to provide freebie to their population, then they must do from their own state's earning. And this should not be done as a part of subsidy because it then becomes financially unsustainable. So here the CAG has highlighted that in this regard, there is a need for proper accounting of subsidies by the states. There is a need to remove revenue deficits and reduce fiscal deficit by the states. There is a need to keep outstanding debts at appropriate level, and states should meet their capital expenditure, including loans and advances, that is the loans taken by respective state governments, from their own sources of revenues. So these are some of the suggestions provided by the CAG to states, especially with respect to provision of freebie. Now, as such, there is no clear distinction between subsidy and freebie. However, subsidy can be understood as part of public distribution system, certain employment guarantee scheme provided by the central or state government, state support for health and education, whereas freebie can be said to be any free facility or free services provided by the state to its citizens. So basically, the CAG has highlighted increasing expenditure by the respective state governments on freebies. And according to the CAG, the state government's expenditure on subsidies has grown from 11.2% to 12.9% during 2020-21 and 2021-22. And in the recent period, the state governments have started delivering a portion of their subsidies in the form of freebies. So a portion of the subsidy has been started being delivered as freebie. Now, legally speaking, there is no precise definition of freebies, yet it differs from subsidy which is provided by respective central or state government on merit goods or for public goods like public distribution system, employment guarantee schemes, state support for education and health, or expense for other social welfare mechanism for which proper policies has been made either at the central or at the state level. Whereas freebie can be said to be a one-time step provided by state government or central government. For example, waiving of electricity bill, or for example, waiving of farmer loans for last 1 year or 2 years, or providing free electricity. But as such, there is no clear distinction between subsidy and freebie. And one of the concerns highlighted by CAG is that portion of subsidy is being delivered in the form of freebies. And this is also impacting credit sustainability of different state governments. Now, if we compare subsidy with that of freebie, in freebies is the state government which provides free electricity, free water, free transport, free laptops. It also provides for waiver of farm loans or waiver of electricity bills, etc. So state, in a way of providing these free services, undermines the credit culture and also disincentivizes work at current wage rate, and this overall leads to drop in labor force participation. So the major issues with subsidies and freebies has been highlighted as number one, it is regressive in nature. as some of these subsidies such as electricity subsidy, fertilizers, MSP, etc. are universal in nature and are given to all the households irrespective of their socio-economic status. Since these subsidies are universal in nature, that is, it is applicable for all households, so such subsidies benefit the richer households more as compared to the poor households, and hence can be said to be regressive in nature and also against the concept of equality. The next point highlighted is regarding leakages and corruption while providing subsidies or freebie. And the point highlighted here is inclusion and exclusion errors. So, inclusion errors, also called leakage, connote provision of aid to the non-needy. That is, subsidy is provided to those people who actually do not need that subsidy. Whereas exclusion errors, also called undercoverage, imply failure to reach the needy. So those people whose name should be on the list to whom subsidy is to be provided, their name is struck off from the list or their name is deleted from the list. And this deletion of name from the list of provision of subsidy result in exclusion error. It then talks about duplicate and ghost beneficiaries. That is, subsidy benefits being issued in the name of those people who do not actually exist. Another concern is presence of middlemen, poor administrative efficiency, etc. Now the example highlighted here is 46% leakage in the case of public distribution system mechanism. The next point highlighted is that subsidies create distortions and ultimately affect poor people. Now the example highlighted here is that farm subsidies like MSP, that is minimum support price, encouraged production of water intensive crops like rice and wheat, and this prevented crop diversification. So ultimately it resulted in low income growth of the farmers, because then farmers generally go for such crops for which the government is providing a minimum support price and do not diversify their crop. So this ultimately result in low income growth of farmers because MSP is provided only for certain crops. Now the next point highlighted is about cross subsidization. Now first of all, let us understand the problem of cross subsidization. Now suppose in Indian Railways the passenger fare is rupees 100, but because the government is providing subsidy, hence the government is only charging rupees 50 as passenger fare. So this extra rupees 60 will be then charged from goods fare. So we see that the rate of freights on the railway is higher as compared to the passenger fare. So this is an example of cross subsidization whereby the government, in order to meet its expenditure requirement, charges more from other sector. Similarly is the case with electricity. As we all know that the domestic charges are comparatively lower and the government also provides certain subsidy. In certain cases, even electricity bill are waived off of certain class of people. Now the subsidy burden, which is then incurred by the government with respect to the domestic consumers, is then charged upon the commercial consumers. So the commercial consumers basically end up paying higher charges for electricity because the government provided subsidy to the domestic consumers. So here it says that subsidies or freebies like flow of free passenger fares or free electricity for public results in cross subsidization through commercial usage, and this increased cost of doing business and hence hinders the growth of private investment. Now here in this example, the industries are giving higher electricity charges. So obviously the goods which they are producing, they will charge a higher cost for that, and overall this increases the cost of doing business. The next concern highlighted is that it distorts credit culture. So it says that freebies like agricultural loan waivers hampers the credit culture among the public. Now suppose if someone has taken a loan of rupees 1 lakh, so they have to work to pay back these loans. What if the government waive off all the loans? So it means that these people are not supposed to give back to the government this amount, and hence it impacts the credit culture among the public. And this also may result in accumulation of bad assets in the banking sector, because ultimately this 1 lakh rupee bill, which was supposed to be paid by the citizen, is now being paid by the government. So ultimately such freebies increases the debt for the government. The last issue highlighted is with respect to the aspect of revenue deficit. Now the FRBM Act generally provides that the revenue deficit should be zero. So it says that increasing investment on subsidies and freebies increases the revenue expenditure and hence increases the revenue deficit. And overall, this leaves little room or almost no room for the government to invest on capital expenditure, which means money invested by any organization, including government, to acquire or upgrade fixed physical or non consumable assets. So, these can be said to be some of the issues with respect to providing subsidies and freebies to the public at large. Thus, this article becomes important mainly from the perspective of economy, both in the prelims examination and also in the mains examination under GS paper 3. So with this, we come to an end to today's discussion. Thank you for watching DNS.